US-India relationship? US isolationism is in full display. Will vacuum created by retreat be filled by China? Will it not undermine efforts to mitigate effects of climate change? Does the Sanctioning Act show that the relationship between Putin and Trump has soured? On this issue, I am joined by Ambassador Suresh Goyal, Ambassador Jain Dasgupta, and Professor Scott Lucas from International Politics, Clinton Institute. Let me straight away go to Ambassador Goyal, sir. The first thing first. I mean to say, one is American retreat and second is this 500% tariff. Your opening comments, how will this affect India if it comes into force, sir?
The first word that comes to mind is mind-boggling, if I can say so, because I thought that 25% additional duty on India, sparing China from that net, was actually a madness, considering that we thought that India and USA were partners in the international peace and security and stability in Indo-Pacific region. But anyway, it happened. On the other hand, China escaped it. Now, 500% additional duty will be really mind-boggling, number one. Number two, impact on India. I think India had already begun the process of diversifying its trade destinations. And our dependence on the USA as a major market hopefully has begun to come down. With a 500% tariff, our exports to USA are going to be severely impacted in any case, and we will have to look for the additional other markets. The problem is that when you begin to look for these kind of alternative markets, the competition suddenly enhances. It goes through the roof. And in that competition, what role will China play? In fact, I'm rather worried that with this kind of an additional duty, it could probably lead to greater isolation of the USA internationally, not just trade, but politically. And with that isolation, how Trump is going to behave, I do not know. Whether Trump will decide that because of this isolation, he has to invade India or China or something. I don't know really. It's difficult to say how he's going to work it out, but it's going to be creating quite a few, not just ripples, but storm.
Okay. Ambassador Jain Dasgupta, the other thing which is evident is that in American scheme of things, India means nothing. I mean to say 25%, 50%. When you talk about 500%, I mean, so it's a show way to really not only shake a relationship, but to shake its foundation.
Well, I think anything above 50, and especially if other competitors are in the region of 19, 20, 25%, that puts you out of the market in any case. And that is what has happened to about 45% of India's exports to the US. But of course, the electronic sector, pharmaceuticals, mobile phones, these have all been left out of the tariffs of 50% by the US administration. So 500, whether it is 500% or 300% or 2000%, it doesn't really matter because no trade will take place at those levels. Even now at 50% tariffs, when the other competitors are having a tariff of 25 or 20%, it has already dried up. So it is only a headline grabbing kind of a thing, which Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal are indulging in. The second point I wanted to make is that this is a private bill, and whether it will even receive the full support of the Republicans and the Democrats, separately, that remains to be seen, because I don't think that there are too many, senators and House of Representative members who would give these kind of powers to President Trump, especially because only about 10.5 months now remain for the midterm elections. And empowering President Trump could lead to a very, different kind of feeling amongst the people. So that is the second point. The third point is that the tariffs, whether they will apply on buying from Rosneft and Lukoil, which India has stopped buying from, or they will apply across the board to other Russian oil entities from which apparently India has now diverted and is buying some oil. Now, if and when it comes through, then India will stop buying from these Russian entities also. But if President Trump wants to stop completely the sale of Russian oil, it will have definitely an impact on global supplies. And then it could affect the consumers in the US as well, because after all, global prices will get reflected, and US inflation rate is already at 3%. So he has to make a very complex kind of a calculation while imposing sanctions.
I think, sir, Midas touch of Donald Trump is that he's dealing with most complex things very simply. That is why you have the issues of purchase of Greenland through a brokered negotiation, and why it is important. Professor Scott Lucas, your opening comments on Trump green lighting this private member bill. And I always say that apart from what happens in the House, like a lot of people say that the private members bill in Indian parliament doesn't mean a thing, unless the government adopts it. But the fact that you allow it, the fact that you support it, it's sending a signal. 500%.
Yeah, it's a signal, but I'd be cautious in terms of whether we're talking about this being an imminent bill that will be adopted. I mean, this has been touted for months by Senators Graham, Senator Blumenthal, and the Trump administration has actually gone a different route. For example, with the sanctions on Russia's oil companies, which India has felt the effect of. I think even if Trump said he was going to greenlight this, there are a whole series of hurdles for this to go through. And I would say at this point, this is more of a Trump thought bubble. This is him shaking his fist again at the Russians and at India as well. Now, I think there's a wider point, however, which is that
I think there's a bit of a feed problem with our friend Professor Scott Lucas. Ambassador Goel, my question is very simple here. That okay, it may take time, 500% may not take place, but why is Trump so oblivious to what has happened in past 25 years between New Delhi and Washington?
Now, that's a good question, really, because right in the beginning of the presidency, the impression was, and we had thought, that Prime Minister Modi and President Trump are getting so happily together, really, like old friends. But clearly, things are very different. Now, I think Trump, if I can speak rather candidly on this channel now here, I think Trump has in mind his ambitions of coming with China, using China in a sense in this global rivalry for power, and thinking of Indo-Pacific as the area for China, and therefore leave Taiwan out. The only other country which actually is a fly in the ointment in the scheme of China being Indo-Pacific and USA being Latin America is India. And in that case, I don't really see Trump thinking anything of sacrificing Indian interest in the mind. I mean, look at the way he refers to Prime Minister Modi. He's a good friend, but he came to me. Oh, my dear sir, can I meet you for a few minutes? It's a very derisive and very derogatory kind of a language to be used for the head of a country, the head of government. And the way he went in Venezuela, therefore, somebody mentioned that he's a purely mercantile person. He is. But I don't think he has a kind of respect for India that we saw in the first term. Obviously, the perceptions have changed. Obviously, his own idea of the global power matrix has changed. And now he looks at the world in terms of G2, China, Indo-Pacific, the USA, the Southern Hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere, as he has said it. That's what my assessment is. We will have to wait for more to see whether this is true or not.
Okay. And sir, Professor Scott Lucas is back. Professor, this 500% development is also accompanied by United States of America withdrawing from 66 international bodies, both UN and non-UN. One thing which caught my eye, sir, was he has also exited, in fact, two, Intergovernmental Climate Panel, and the second, the Solar Alliance led by France and India, to which India has been very much committed for mitigating the climate change effects. This American retreat from global affairs is getting married to Trump's imperial ambitions, and this makes the world a very dangerous place, Professor.
Absolutely. I apologize for getting cut off earlier. The point I was going to make with respect both to the 500% tariff and to your general question here is, in a way, the 500% is just Trump shaking his fist. The wider and very serious point here is, not only do you have an unpredictable, a chaotic Trump, beyond Trump, you have advisors who no longer believe in alliances. I mean, they don't believe in an alliance with Europe, let alone with India. They no longer believe in international organizations. Therefore, they're withdrawing from them. They no longer believe in regional organizations. It will be interesting, for example, to see if they still remain committed to the Quad with India. This group around Trump only believes in personal power for themselves. It is a return almost to the 19th century colonialism of men who think they can dominate the rule or they can carve it up. What happens here is that India becomes expendable in this. You know, you've had your ups and downs with various U.S. administrations. It has not been smooth. What you have to realize here is you cannot assume there is any type of goodwill from these men in terms of a cooperative relationship. They will see you in terms of a transaction. Can they get money out of you? Can they get influence out of you? And that means that that personal relationship that you just heard about, which Prime Minister Modi had held up with Donald Trump, and it was very prominent in the first term, that means very little now, because the United States does not see other countries or other leaders as equals. At least the Trump people don't. They see you only as people who should bow down to them. You may not get a 500% tariff. It may stay only at 50%, but you still will be held economically and politically hostage by whatever their next whim is.
Oh, absolutely. I mean to say the entire import of our jet engines is on a slow line. It's not on a fast line. We were supposed to get so many jet engines for our aircraft program. 3 or 4 have been delivered. Delivery should have started 6 or 8 months ago, maybe a year ago. So there are a lot of things. For example, even on the issue of the Apache helicopters, the president was saying 68. The reality is 28. But Ambassador Dasgupta, my question is, there is an American retreat also. I played out a special graphic. Politics and power abhors vacuum. You expect China to step in, or what happens to these institutions then?
I think let us take up the case of the UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Yes.
Now, the largest polluter at the moment is the US, followed by China, and then followed by India. So if the US has nothing to do with climate change negotiations and taking commitments, then I think the rest of the world will not be able to really tackle this situation. And already there are indications that from the pre-industrial levels, the temperature has risen by about 1.4, 1.5 degrees Celsius already. And if it crosses 2 degrees Celsius, it would have very, very bad consequences for many countries which are having long coastlines with people living in the tropical areas. So if President Trump, is withdrawing and it is going to last for the rest of his term, that will be really catastrophic for many areas which will have a deep impact on the lives of people. That is one thing. I don't think really that the others can step up to the plate and take the additional burden, whether it is, because China definitely has the financial resources to contribute and make up for the the gap which will remain because of the American withdrawal. But that is not something which is consequential. The impact is going to be that it will not be part of any agreement, any consensus decision, any thing which the whole planet has to come together and cooperate and take a view on. So that is where I think the real problem will lie. And this gap cannot be filled.
This gap cannot be filled. Can I say, Professor Scott Lucas, the entire headway which the world has made in the last 25 years on the climate change is now, it stands completely stalled and the poor nations will have to pay for it?
It's not just simply climate change. I think, again, to make the broader point, because the Trump administration not only does not believe in international cooperation, it also has people in it who are conspiracy theorists, who are deniers of science. So they have climate change deniers who are in, and combined with the idea, why should we cooperate with anyone else? The United States, in effect, is leaving. They are out of the climate change agreements. That is also true of international health. Your viewers may well know that the U.S. Department of Health is led by someone who's a conspiracy theorist, who's an anti-vaxxer, and therefore the U.S. has left health organizations, not just over, for example, vaccines. They've left it in terms of cooperation over prevention of pandemics. So what does that mean? Does that mean we throw up our hands? I think it means that other countries have to rally around each other. You know, we can't give up on climate change. We can't give up on these health issues, but it does mean that India, Europe, Gulf states, China, all these other countries are going to have to double down harder and say, okay, we would rather have the U.S. in on this, and it will limit our efforts, but we have to keep pressing forward, because I'll come back to another point that your guest had made. We're only 10 and a half months away from these midterms.
Okay.
And the U.S. administration is in trouble right now. So when they fall, we have to be there to pick up the pieces.
Ambassador Goyal, if I have to contextualize my question, United States of America has exited these 66 troops. Going by this Russia Sanctioning Act, it shows that, maybe the relationship between Putin and Trump has faltered. So, this is a bit of a chest thumping he's doing with the bill. But in terms of not respecting the organizations and the pacts that the United States has built in last 100 years, what is the consequence of this behavior for NATO, sir? Because there's a constant talk on Greenland also. So I'm just broadening this discussion, because this is one pattern, one behavior in terms of 66 organization. Then, you don't respect your allies, which is India in this case, the way your main aides behave. For example, Deputy Chief of Staff's wife, Kathy Libbert, she tweeted, I think 6 days ago, a map of Greenland with an American flag. So will NATO survive, because in this American retreat?
I think, Kartikeya, that's a very, very good point that you have raised here. And frankly, right in the beginning, when President Trump said that Europe has to contribute more or take care of NATO more, he had been slowly drifting to the idea of getting away from the European security. Now, if we go by President Trump's idea of what actually is in it for him, he's a person who really thinks of a personal advantage. And therefore, if he says, why should I be spending all that money on the European security? What does it mean for him? Nothing. If he has Greenland, he is able to secure his security through Arctic, and the Europe can go to dogs. Therefore, NATO, I don't think President Trump is wedded to NATO. If getting away from NATO can serve his point of view, all good. The only thing now I would say here is going from Mr. Lucas, when he said that, I think now is the time when the interest, for the first time in history, I'm noticing it, European interest and the Asian interest are converging together, both in terms of climate, in terms of a global order and trade. And if Europe and Asian interests can converge together, where even if it includes China, I think this is the opportunity when we can really see how USA can come out of the equation.
Absolutely.
Or go out of the equation.
Absolutely. But there is one thing, Ambassador Dasgupta, you can say, Kartikeya, you are wrong. I feel that, the powerful nations like the United States of America, including China and Russia, which has the largest Arctic expeditionary force right now, even better than America, instead of preventing climate change, I think they have decided to monetize it, because Greenland is all about an open Arctic, because there is no proper Arctic fees. So this whole war on the roof of the world is because they know that they have decided they will not stop climate change, or they don't want to stop climate change, or they think they cannot prevent climate change, or why should they spend money on mitigating the disaster? So we make the best of climate change. And that is why this whole entire race for the Greenland is.
Well, I think it is extremely short-sighted for the leader of a nation which has been in the lead in all areas since World War II. And, the US was also the peacekeeper of the world, self-appointed peacekeeper of the world because of its military and economic might. Now, if with this, action to pick up President Maduro of Venezuela along with his wife, and then say that 30 to 40 million barrels of oil will be delivered to Venezuelan oil will be delivered to the US, and then to say that today I think there is a statement from one of the cabinet members that this oil sales revenue will be deposited in an account which will be controlled by the US, and it will go towards meeting the development requirements of Venezuela. So it is virtually a takeover of Venezuela, even if it doesn't go, it's not going to last for very long, or maybe 10, 15 years, but it is a takeover of the another country, independent country, which has been independent for more than a century. So this is the kind of thing, if this is the respect that a sovereign nation gets and its leader, whether they are, there are dictators of all sorts in the world, many of whom are very close to the US administration. So it is not a question of principle that President Trump and his administration is expounding. Monarchies, for instance, all over the world. Why are they supporting the monarchies?
No, it's like dictators of choice, sir. He likes Asim Munir, but he didn't like Maduro. So you have a dictators of choice. But I need to take a closing comment from Professor Lucas. Professor Lucas, is the world going to be cut like, I'm sorry to use this word, like a Chinese melon? And it's a historical phrase, We read it in an NCRT.
I know. I'll use a slightly different historical analogy. Many years ago, there's a fellow named Nero who supposedly fiddled while Rome burned. Well, Donald Trump tweets while the world might burn this time around, because as long as he can make money out of it, and as long as his advisors think they can dominate the world, they're happy for it to burn. So I think recognizing that, you have to say, no, this is not inevitable, because India has influence. Europe, as we heard, has influence. Other countries have influence. And there are many Americans who do not agree with what the Trump administration is doing. Remember, America is 50 states. It's many different state and local governments, some of whom would like to trade with India directly without the federal government. Now, that's more difficult because of Trump. But don't completely abandon America because of this horrible, horrible regime that's at the top of it. That's what I would beg of you today. And no, we don't need to slice up the world. We can still live in it together and make sure that it doesn't burn.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Ambassador Goel. Thank you, Ambassador Dasgupta, for joining me on this show. So this was all I had on Point 1. Coming up next, we discuss the prevailing tensions in Iran, where 34 protesters have been killed by the Khamenei regime.
शिव प्रसाद जी को बीमारी के कारण 15 बार हॉस्पिटल में एडमिट होना पड़ा। पॉलिसी बाजार की टीम ने उनका लाखों का क्लेम अप्रूव करवाने में पूरी हेल्प की। पॉलिसी बाजार पर 1 करोड़ का हेल्थ इंश्योरेंस सिर्फ 550 रुपए महीने से शुरू।
पढ़ता है, खेलता है, झूलता उछलता है, दौड़ता कभी कभी दौड़ कराता है, आगे आगे बढ़ता है इंडिया, अमूल दूध पीता है इंडिया।
भारत माता के करोड़ों संतानों का अजय स्वाभिमान है श्री सोमनाथ महादेव की पावन धरती। वर्ष 1026 से सोमनाथ का विध्वंस करने की कुटिल कोशिशें बार बार हुई, लेकिन ये विध्वंस की नहीं, 1000 साल की अटूट आस्था की गाथा है। अनगिनत सनातनियों ने सर्वोच्च बलिदान दिया। उसी सनातनी शौर्य के 1000 वर्षों का महापर्व है सोमनाथ स्वाभिमान पर्व, जिसमें गूंजेगा 72 घंटों का अखंड ओमकार, बहेगी आध्यात्मिक संगीत की रसधार और आकाश में ड्रोन शो के जरिए जीवंत होगी श्री सोमनाथ की आदि अनंत महागाथा। प्रधानमंत्री श्री नरेंद्र मोदी की उपस्थिति में सोमनाथ की सांस्कृतिक गौरव यात्रा के साक्षी बने सोमनाथ स्वाभिमान पर्व।
2026, take notes. Manifesting. For my little Miss Sunshine, tickles and giggles. Also want to be a biker chick this time. And year 2026, only love for my people and myself. To manifest my best life, nature's cosmic energy.
Now mine, natural diamond intention pendants.
From death to America in 1959 to death to the dictator in 2026, Iran has come a long way. And yet the scenes emerging from the Islamic Republic look like they are playing on a loop since past 47 years. Iran's population is approximately 88 million. The population is relatively young, with a median age of around 35 years, and is highly urbanized, with over 78% of the population living in cities. Iran today runs two economies, one on paper and one on the street. While the government claims an official rate of 42,000 rial per dollar, real prices follow a free market rate above 1 million. The gap is the result of the decades of mismanagement, opacity, and an extractive economic model that discourages investment and reward. Rent seeking is encouraged. Maybe I would say that it's norm there. And when currency collapses and the trust vanishes, protest becomes inevitable, as you see on the screen. Costly imports, years of drought, Western sanctions, systemic corruption, and constrained oil revenues have all contributed to runaway inflation in Iran. Food and basic necessities, housing and rent, medicine and healthcare, fuel and transportation, and utilities have become unaffordable for Iranians. As inflation surged past 50%, households rushed to protect what little they had, buying dollars and gold. That only pushed the rial further down, triggering a vicious cycle. Traders and shopkeepers were the first to take to the streets in late December, starting from Tehran's Grand Bazaar. What began as an economic protest quickly turned political. Students, workers, and families across generations joined in. Slogans shifted from prices to power, directly targeting the Islamic Republic and Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. At least 34 protesters have been killed in nearly 2 weeks of unrest. More than 2,000 protesters have been detained by the Revolutionary Guards and the Basij. Clashes erupted in Tehran's main market and in Adnan in the Ilam province on January 6th. Protesters chanted "Death to dictator" and the Pahlavi will return. The US State Department's Persian account has been actively involved in monitoring the situation. It openly amplified protest visuals thanking demonstrators after Tehran street was symbolically renamed after Donald Trump. US President Donald Trump warned Tehran that America was locked and loaded if protesters were killed. So the big question is regime change possible in Iran? Are protests still economic or political in nature? How firm is the rule of clergy in the country? Why are Iranians raising pro-Pahlavi slogans? Will these protests persist? Now let me straight away go to my guests, Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, Dr. Zakir Hussain and Itai Melchior. All of them join me, but let me first go to Ambassador Prabhu Dayal. Ambassador, one aspect of this protest is there is an unrest in the bazaar. The second aspect of the protest is that the people born after 80s, a lot of writers say, have no memory of the revolution, and they feel that their parents have voted a closed regime, which has completely cut Iran off from the larger world. And the third thing which is coming out is that the people are saying pro-Pahlavi, shouting pro-Pahlavi slogans. I want you to put this in perspective for our viewers in India. Why is this happening?
Well, you know, Iran is experiencing some of the most intense unrest in its modern history. And this is driven by an economic crisis, a collapsing currency, and rising public anger due to a number of reasons which you pointed out during your introductory remarks. Now, over the past week, protests that began as strikes by shopkeepers over the plunging rial have spread to major cities across the country. And demonstrators are now openly criticizing the government's economic management and chanting anti-leadership slogans. As you pointed out, there are reports that these slogans also include death to Khamenei, which is really, really unforeseen, because to raise slogans like that against the supreme leader of the country takes an enormous amount of courage in Iran. Now, inflation has soared above 40%, and food prices have risen over 70%. So for many Iranians, basic survival has become a struggle, and people have been pushed onto the streets because of their desperation. So public anger is directed not just at the economic hardship itself, but at the government and clerical establishment, which are seen as responsible for decades of economic mismanagement and endemic corruption. Protesters accuse the government of prioritizing funding of proxy groups like Hezbollah and Hamas over domestic needs. Now, human rights groups report that at least 36 deaths of protesters have taken place and more than 2,000 arrests. Now, amid this turmoil, multiple intelligence reports from various outlets say that the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, could leave Tehran with around 20 close aides and family members, perhaps head towards Moscow. And this alleged escape plan would be triggered if Iran's army or the Revolutionary Guard Corps or some other security services were to desert or refuse orders to suppress protests. Now, President Trump has warned the Iranian government that if Tehran violently kills peaceful protesters, America will come to their rescue. Iranian leaders in turn have responded with threats, declaring that any foreign interference or intervention would make American military personnel and bases in the region legitimate targets. Therefore, taking all this into account, the situation is very tense and very dangerous.
Okay. Dr. Zakir Hussain, your opening comments, sir. Iran is a hard state. Is it ripe for a change?
It's hard state.